Welcome to the final section of Chapter 6, The Etruscans. Here we're looking at later Etruscan art and the rise of Rome. Don't forget to keep this timeline handy and to always look back at these dates. So what's going on now? This period that we're looking at with the end of Chapter 6 as we prepare to transition to Chapter 7. Rome is introduced into the picture. Okay, so Rome is founded in 753 BC, if you can just kind of follow me on the timeline. In 616, the Etruscans place one of their own kings onto the city of Rome. Okay, now you want to imagine Rome not like it is today. Very different, kind of a small gathering of, homes, so nothing grand and extravagant. But in 509 BC, the Romans have had enough of having another group rule them, so they throw out the Etruscan king. That's what I have there as expulsion of Etruscan kings from Rome in 509 BC. Now that also marks the Roman Republic's date, like the start of the Roman Republic. And the Roman Republic will continue until 27 BC, indicated here with the yellow big bar. Now, throughout that time, the Romans continued to expand their power. So in 396 BC, they will take over Veii, which is an Etruscan city-state. And then in 273 BC, they take over Cerveteri, which you've also seen as one of the cemeteries. That's another Etruscan city-state. And then in 270 BC, the Etruscans lose their independence to Rome. However, they still continue to prosper. So that's important to think about. They're still in existence. They're not completely wiped out. But in 89 BC, we have the completion of the Romanization of Italy. In other words, at that time, the Etruscans are essentially not a distinct group of people anymore. At this point, they've been assimilated into and with the Romans. Okay, so chapter 6, this last component, is very much the transition into chapter 7 with the Roman Republic. What is the legend about the founding of Rome? I've given you a painting, not from the era that we're studying, much, much later, but I believe it brings in all the characters that are relevant, so I want to make it easier for us to understand this. First of all, there is the god of war, Mars, and he has relations with a mortal woman, depicted here, right behind him, there on the left side. Well, the outcome of that union are two twins, and you see them in the front, those cute little babies. We're told there's a wicked great uncle, or kind of a jealous uncle, jealous relative that didn't want them to be around, and so wanted to kill them. And so what the mother does is that she puts them on a boat in the Tiber River. Other versions say that they were abandoned on the banks of the river. Well, these two little babies are found by a shepherd, and you see the shepherd there in the painting on the right, and a nurse, a she-wolf, suckles them, so nurses them. In other words, these two babies are fed and nourished, and they don't die, right? Their fate is changed, and the shepherd raises them. Well, the twins grow up to adulthood, and they want to decide to build a city. However, they are in a debate because they don't know which spot they want to build the city on. Now, what ends up happening is Romulus kills his brother Remus and then creates the city that we know of today as Rome. So you can obviously remember Rome comes from the word Romulus. So with that story in mind, let's look at the capital line wolf, what you're seeing here. Many agree that this is one of those most powerful, memorable images of an animal that we have in the history of art. Its early history and the subject matter are unknown. However, most historians agree because evidence seems to suggest that this is the work of an Etruscan artist. Now, we also know that at this time, it appears that the Romans really venerated works by Etruscans, because we're looking at this date as 500 to 480 BC. This is only about 9 years after the Romans have thrown out that Etruscan king and have set up the Republic. So what we conclude now is that this is actually created by an Etruscan workshop, but for the Roman Republic. Now what I want you to kind of think about with this is that what this object illustrates is that there's no clean break between the cultures. Just as you saw in a few slides prior to this, where that timeline showed you that the Etruscans are still around as the Romans are expanding their power, assimilating with the Etruscans until there really is no Etruscan, but they've pretty much become part of this group of people known as the Romans. What's interesting about this piece is, though, when it was created, there were no babies. And you see kind of a photoshopped version of this. This is not my doing, but this is the only image that I could find, where we don't see the baby. So it's important for us when we're looking at this as an Etruscan slash Roman object to envision it without those little babies there. And that's important because if the babies had been there, we would have no doubt about the identity, right? But with the babies there, we were very clear about the identity. But the question then is, who put the babies there? It's believed that the artist Palaiolo in the Renaissance put the babies there in around 1471, 1473, possibly to allow them to resemble the Roman coin representations that we had of lactating she-wolf with the babies. And you've got a couple of examples down there in the lower part of that slide. Now, what's also interesting about the slide, and this is why I chose these coins to show you, is that you're looking at a Greek unit of currency, but that it was minted in Rome. And what we believe is going on here is that it's demonstrating this coerced assimilation of the Greeks into Roman culture, and we see that through the coinage. And this will happen as the Roman Empire, of course, the Republic and the Empire begin to expand. But I wanted to put this in here because this explains why and at what point the babies were actually added in there. Let's look at the work again, and this time I've blocked off the babies because I want to look at the work in its kind of pristine method here. You can kind of get the details very much here. So let's describe the she-wolf here. A very tense, watchful body, these powerful legs, alert eyes, glaring ears and eyes as well, a ferocious muzzle, right? All of these capturing its intensity, its fierceness, its protective beast nature, right? So what we want to ask is, why would the she-wolf be chosen by the Republic? And what we also believe is that it was chosen as the emblem of the Roman Republic and all the way into the later Roman eras as well. So why would this be chosen? Now, there are a lot of things we can say about it, right? Kind of one of those things is defiant image here. Think about how the Romans were defiant. They did not want the Etruscan power to rule over them anymore. Others see this as the Romans desiring to capture a legendary mother wolf, right? This was part of their origin story, right? The founding of Rome in 753 with the story of Romulus and Remus. So capturing the legendary she-wolf would then bring up their own origins. So the Republic, born in 509 BC, is actually kind of letting its people know that our origins are several centuries prior to the birth of the Republic. Other suggestions, I've had discussions with students about this, possibly this idea of divine intervention, right? Those babies were destined to die, or left to die, but their fate changed, right? They were raised by a shepherd and suckled by a she-wolf. Maybe there's a connotation here of a second chance, right? Rome, founded in 753, under Etruscan rule for some time, now has its own republic. Maybe there is another idea here about a motherland, right? That it represents kind of their own soil, their own birthplace. Others suggest comments about loyalty. You can also look at the work and think about how it's nurturing, right? You can see that it would have suckled the babies, but it's also fierce and powerful. Not a bad idea for a republic that would take care of its own, but would be very defiant of any kind of attack. Here's a look at another fierce creature. In this case, this is a chimera of Arezzo. And it has an inscription on it, which basically would be read as a gift to the god Tinia. So this is a votive offering in a sanctuary. Some think that it's belonged to a group, others believe that it can pretty much stand on its own. So the chimera is a monster, and it's a Greek invention. What we know about this monster is it had a lion's head and a body, a serpent's tail, as you see here, and a goat's head is coming out of the left side of the lion's body, and I'll show you a few other angles in just a second. But the goat's head is what bears the wound that the Greek hero Bellerophon inflicted when he hunted and killed this very mythical beast. So what do you see? You see the victim of the hero's weapon. Now, what else do you see? Look at how the creature is fighting back, is fierce. The jaw is open, there's a ferocious, powerful cry, and he's actually getting ready to leap forward and attack. In other words, he's injured and bleeding, but he's not stopping. He's fierce. What does that tell you about the hero? that he was stronger than this creature, right? That he was more powerful than this creature. So Bellerophon, who is the Greek hero, is the one who slays this. Now again, right, we're thinking about, okay, here's an Etruscan workshop work with a reference to a Greek hero and created in the Roman world. What are we seeing? We're seeing all of this blend of cultural ideas coming together into a very fierce creature. And I want to show you some other angles of it to really better be able to understand the power of this animal or animalistic form, this creature that we're looking at. So this would be the face he would have seen, right? Bellerophon would have seen this image. And here is the other side where you can see the goat's head jutting out of the left side of the body. And I hope this has proven to you that you need to walk around sculptures, especially the Chimera, where you can see, first of all, the three creatures. You can see the form of the body even more accentuated here, right? The legs, the position, ready to truly pounce onto the hero that Bellerophon, that we've talked about. So the fierceness, the power, the vitality, the energy of this sculpture and the creature all are evident when you're able to experience it all in the round and without kind of walking all around it as often as you can, taking a glimpse of every single angle and every single encounter. And here we have another Etruscan work in this later Etruscan era, the Alla Metelle, or also called the Arringatore. Now this is an early 1st century BC work, and the circumstances of its discovery are a little bit unclear, and so that is posing once again a problem for us of, Etruscan but Roman influence, but there's also Greek influence and kind of what is going on. But it's probably, most historians suggest, made by an Etruscan because the inscription is Etruscan, and the name Alla Metellus is basically telling us that it's possibly an Etruscan assimilated into the Roman. So we're already seeing that cultural assimilation taking place. However, there are also Greek influences here in terms of the standing, focus on the male form. I mean, not nude certainly, but this kind of powerful civic leader that's represented here. And it's not unusual because there was an influx of Greek artists coming to Rome and this Etruria that we're studying as well. And eventually Greece is conquered by the Romans, so that's not unusual in that point a little bit later. But how would you describe this individual? I'm thinking self-confident, right? Intelligent, engaged with the audience. He's basically an orator, which is what the Arringatore is. He's an orator. He's a public speaker. He's a magistrate. So he's one of those that's in an assembly and he's discussing issues and laws and different kinds of issues about the government and administration with the people. So his pose is authoritative, it's probably persuasive, it's confident. So all of these are really important to help us understand this transition into the Roman world where the Etruscan workshops are still, in play and are still used. I love the side view because you can see that arm fully extending out. This is a public speaker. He's engaging with the public. He's breaking that confined space of his body and really interacting. And we know that that's going to be a big, it has been kind of this active representation in Etruscan art, but it'll also be very important for us in Roman art that we're about to look at. Now, I want to point out a few class symbols. The Romans are very class conscious. What strata of society are you from? Now, the tunic that he wears underneath that toga, that's a class symbol. The toga, definitely a marker of upper class. Why? Well, here's the thing, you guys. If he's wearing that, he's not involved in manual labor, right? This is a distinguished position. It's almost like a businessman, going out and doing construction work, okay? That's manual labor. You can't wear a business suit while you're working, in the field and kind of doing heavy lifting and pushing and so on. So that's kind of the association I can make here. And the toga was adopted as a status symbol by the Romans, and it was an Etruscan dress. So there is that link again between the cultures that we've seen. Now the boots he wears, those also are status symbols. They're actually the boots worn by magistrates, or the fancy, fancy kind of boots of the time. So we're seeing the status symbols indicating to us that this is an important individual, not just any normal citizen of the time. Why is that hand gesture so important? Because it becomes kind of a mark of engaging with the public. And then in the Roman chapter, we will see Augustus, here represented on the right, doing the same thing, right? Pointing out his hand. But Augustus is talking to his army. Okay, so we're seeing this connection of the speaker, of the leader with the public. And you know what? There's another representation like this that we're more familiar with. What do you think? Here's President Obama engaging with the public. This is actually, guys, before his first tenure as president, so much younger, obviously. And there he is behind the podium. This is actually when he's running for presidency, right, or running for the candidacy. So he's engaging with the public, pointing to people in the crowd, and very charming and charismatic and whatever else it is. But look at the hand, right? It's so important when we break that mold, that confined space of our body, and we interact with those around us. So our gestures become such a key factor of that kind of interaction. And I love how these sculptures in the photograph identify that. So as we tie up the Etruscan chapter and we prepare to launch into the Roman chapter, I'm going to put these two side by side. In the Roman Republic, we will see sculptures like the one on the right. This is a man with a bust of his ancestors. We believe he's a patrician, which is kind of a wealthy aristocratic man. So look at the focus on the face, right? It's an elderly individual, wrinkles and all. Even the bust that he's holding in his hand, right? These are kind of half-balding, kind of short-cropped hair individuals with signs of age. We see that with the Aula Metella, our Oringatore. Because here's the thing, this was a symbol of a civic leader, one who was dedicated and committed to his position. It's a really important factor in the Roman Republic, and we see it now with our Oringatore in this later Etruscan art. And then these side by side to really look at the faces. The Romans paid attention to the faces. The Greeks, right, they want the youthful, idealized, eternally young face. But we don't see that with the Etruscan, later Etruscan art, and then the Roman Republic that we're about to enter in the next chapter. So this wraps it up, you guys. We're going to jump into the chapter 7 material, but complete all the work for this and then go on forward.